So to express Canada power, you have to go get a foreign king, what's that? How is the king convincing in any way?
It's a joke.
Not everyone is sold on King Charles's upcoming visit to Canada. But, like it or not, he'll soon be here to open Parliament. It's a visit meant to send a message to Canadians and to Donald Trump. I'm Catherine Cullen, and this week on The House, what should we expect when the king comes to town? Plus, Trump's top man in Canada, what the new U.S. ambassador thinks about Charles's impending arrival, and why he says Canadians need to just get over this 51st state business. Also, Canada and the Middle East.
We expect a full investigation. We expect a immediate explanation of what happened. It's totally unacceptable. It's some of many things that are totally unacceptable that's going on in the region.
Tension between the Canadian and Israeli governments rose this week. Is Canada's stance on the war in Gaza changing? A former Middle East analyst for the Department of Defense weighs in. But we begin with Trump's ambassador on whether the U.S. is really a threat to Canada. The House is now in session. Pete Hoekstra officially became the U.S. ambassador to Canada late last month, while the trade war was well underway. On Thursday afternoon, I sat down with him at the American Embassy to get his take on where the Canada-U.S. relationship now stands. Ambassador Hoekstra, thank you for making the time.
It's good to be with you. Thank you.
Mark Carney just got elected as Prime Minister by telling Canadians President Trump wants to break us so that America can own us. What do you say to that characterization?
I'm glad that the President and the Prime Minister had an opportunity to meet in Washington and to put that all behind us and to move forward in terms of building a stronger relationship, more prosperity, more safety, more security for all of our people.
Since you have taken on the role of ambassador, I read you said the 51st state talk is done. You just said there, behind us. Did Donald Trump tell you directly that he is done with this 51st state business?
No, I think he told Mark Carney that.
Explicitly?
Well, not explicitly. I mean, you saw the conversation, or many people did, where the president talked about it and Mark Carney's, I don't remember his exact words, but it was pretty clear.
Never was certainly one of them. Yeah.
Because the president then responded and said, never say never. Mm-hmm. But, they did it with a smile on their face. It was clear that it was no longer an obstruction, an obstacle to them then leaving the Oval Office and going to the Roosevelt Room and having a very constructive lunch about where America and where Canada can work together.
Okay, so he hasn't said explicitly to you that it's over. You understand that we are looking forward and we're not going to be talking about annexing Canada anytime
I understand
soon.
that from my boss, the President of the United States, Donald Trump. He has not instructed me to go to Canada and say, Pete, get that deal done. I want them as a 51st state. I think that meeting clearly demonstrated that if there's going to be discussion about the 51st state, it's going to be happening at the Donald Trump Carney level, not at the ambassadorial level, which tells me it's done.
You talk about moving forward. The Prime Minister said on Wednesday, the U.S. is an economic threat to Canada. Is it?
My opinion of that would be a little bit different. The United States of America is a huge economic opportunity for Canada. It already is. You're our second largest trading partner. So it's tens of thousands of jobs that are created in Canada each and every day, each and every year. Canadians go to work with product that will be exported to the United States of America that American consumers are gladly buying.
And yet the tariff threat has stalled so much investment in Canada. We have seen various auto plants laying off workers, projects that are being put on pause that were supposed to bring jobs to this country in the coming years that are not going ahead right now. Surely that amounts to an economic threat, even amidst the opportunity. It pulls away from the opportunity.
Well, the president's been clear. What we call USMCA, which is called something else in Canada and is called something else in Mexico.
CUSMA, yeah. So
CUSMA.
we start with Canada here.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, that it was transitory, which is great because the economy changes. We learn from experience and all of these types of things. And I think your term is right, the threat of tariffs, because right now 99.9% of commerce coming from Canada going south is covered by the USMCA, CUSMA, and is tariff-free.
And yet you just called the deal transitory? Was that the word that you used? You mean in the sense that it's only for a limited amount of time, or you're talking about
that we're transiting
the
from,
goods are transiting.
from
Okay.
one agreement. We're transiting from CUSMA to what will be something different in the future, but that was built into the agreement. It was built into CUSMA that there would be a review process.
But I think that's different than a whole new agreement, which seems like it's where we might be headed.
You might be surprised, and neither you and I know exactly how much different it will be, but I would guess that let's wait and see what they come up with. But I think there might be a lot of similarities and things that we recognize.
You say let's wait and see what we come up with. Let's talk about where we are right now. After that meeting in the Oval Office at the White House, of which you were a part, there was a lot of talk about this being a door open for negotiations. What is happening right now? Are negotiations underway between Canada and the U.S.?
My understanding, they are. How intense at this point, I don't know. LeBlanc, your Minister LeBlanc, was in Washington this week. Had meetings with Lutnick and and other officials from our cabinet, and we're the U.S. right now, so I haven't gotten a readout on that meeting.
But can you help me understand? Are we talking about discussions about how we're going to talk, or is this discussion about tariffs and getting them off actually happening already?
When we left the meeting in Washington with Donald Trump and Mark Carney, it was the president saying, "We want a proposal. Give us a proposal. What do how do you see this agreement?" So we're waiting, I think, and believing that the ball is in Canada's court to outline what they would like to do, maybe some proposals and those types of things. If we are talking about how we're going to negotiate, the size of the table, who's around the table, we're in the wrong place. Donald Trump, as you've seen, in this administration, is a team in a hurry. In the first 100 days, we secured our border. And you go through a whole list of accomplishments. They're not looking for a drawn-out negotiation process. If that's what the Canadians and Mark Carney and his team believe is necessary to get to an agreement, it will happen, but I think it will be a ways away. Right now, we're looking, countries from around the world have presented proposals to the president's team. They're evaluating them. They're moving forward with some. They're pitching others, or just saying, "Hey, you're not serious. Okay, come back with a serious proposal, and then we'll talk."
President Trump announced plans this week to build a Golden Dome missile defense system. Cost billions of dollars. President wants it done in 3 years. What exactly does the U.S. want from Canada when it comes to building this Golden Dome?
I think we want a partnership. We've had NORAD, that's been in place since 1958, which has been very, very effective at protecting our interests and our national security for both countries. And so there will, again, be talks between the president and Canadians about, okay, do you want to be part of this capability that would provide more safety and security to the Canadian people. And I think the Prime Minister has said, yeah, we'd be interested in doing that.
Mark Carney, though, also said this week that while Canada will cooperate with the United States when it makes sense, militarily, it's not a guarantee anymore. He said, we are in a position now where we cooperate when necessary, but not necessarily cooperate. Does that sentiment worry you?
No.
Why?
It's Canada. You can do what you want. All right? And if you decide not to cooperate with us on Golden Dome, great. We will build Golden Dome without Canada participation.
In other areas, though, I wonder. I mean, we collaborate in any number of forums, NATO, NORAD. We share a border, as you pointed out. There's no worry?
Well, again, Canadians have, and Mark Carney and others have made it clear, we are a sovereign nation. We will make our decisions based on the best interest of Canadians, which is exactly the way that the U.S. is operating. We're no longer in a position where we're going to be supporting other countries that come at the expense of the American people. We are going to be negotiating in the best interest of America and American people for what is good for America. And we expect other countries to do the same thing in negotiations, and that actually will give us the best kind of agreements.
I'd like to ask you about the Middle East. This week, Canada, the UK, and France released a statement threatening to take action if Israel does not stop its military operations in Gaza and letting more humanitarian aid into Gaza. What is the U.S. response to that call?
We are a strong supporter of Israel, and we believe in every right for Israel to defend itself. They went through a horrific attack on October 7. They are responding, and again, as we just talked about, they're doing what they believe is necessary to keep their people safe and secure. And so we've been strong supporters of Israel's right to defend itself and its citizens.
The move by the Canadian, UK, and French governments is now being tied today by some Israeli officials to the shooting death of 2 Israeli embassy staff in Washington, D.C. Israel's Minister of Diaspora and Combating Anti-Semitism said in a statement that Carney, the UK, and French leaders have, quote, emboldened the forces of terror through their failure to draw moral red lines. This cowardice has a price, and that price is paid in Jewish blood. This is obviously a shooting that happened on American soil. Do you agree with what the Israeli minister is saying?
What I agree with is that it was a horrific attack. Donald Trump is making, and this administration is making every effort to fight anti-Semitism across the United States, but also to fight it globally.
And yet you have 3 world leaders who have criticized the Israeli government and specific policies. Is it right or wrong to draw connections to this terrible shooting and the actions of these world leaders?
Obviously, we do not agree with the Canadian position in terms of criticizing Israel. This is a nation that paid a horrific toll, that is doing everything possible to protect its citizens from another attack like that.
So when I read you that statement, your point of view is that you would offer critique to Canada and not to the comments of the Israeli minister.
Yes.
I'd like to ask you in closing, the King is coming to Ottawa next week. He is going to read the speech from the throne, something a monarch hasn't done in Canada since 1977. Do you believe that there is a message for your president in the fact that the King is coming and giving this address?
I'm excited for Canada that the King is coming. I've sat through a few of the speeches from the throne when I was the ambassador to the Netherlands. We will be watching the speech very closely for the content of the speech because it is the platform of the ruling party. Okay, so we will be looking at the content. We're thrilled that the King will be here. If there's a message in there, there's easier ways to send messages. Just give me a call. Carney can call the president at any time, send the message. But I know what the implication is. It's about the 51st state. It's over, and move on. If the Canadians want to keep talking about it, that's their business. I'm not talking about it. Donald Trump is not talking about it. We've got too much on our plate to move forward because we're all about increasing America's prosperity, safety, and security.
Ambassador Hoekstra, thank you very much for your time today.
Hey, great. Thank you.
Pete Hoekstra is the U.S. ambassador to Canada. We spoke Thursday afternoon. Well, a lot has happened this week involving Canada and the Middle East. Not only Canada's joint statement condemning actions of the Israeli government, but an incident on Wednesday where the Israeli military opened fire near 4 Canadian diplomats. Then the next day in Washington, D.C., the shooting deaths of 2 Israeli embassy employees, which the FBI is calling an act of terror. Politicians here in Canada have condemned the attack, but Israeli officials have tied Canada, the UK, and France's statement to the shootings. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
I say to President Macron, Prime Minister Carney, and Prime Minister Starmer, when mass murderers, rapists, baby killers, and kidnappers thank you, you're on the wrong side of justice. You're on the wrong side of humanity. And you're on the wrong side of history.
So where does it all leave the relationship between Canada and Israel? How much is Canada's position on the Middle East changing? Thomas Junot is a former Middle East analyst for the Department of National Defense. He's now an associate professor of political science at the University of Ottawa. Thomas Junot, welcome back to the House.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get to what we heard from the ambassador, I want to start with Canada siding with the UK and France to criticize Israel. How significant is this?
It's significant in the sense that it's not irrelevant, but I find that there's been quite a bit of exaggeration of how significant of a shift it is, at least so far. At this point, it's only words. It's a statement, right? There has not been a shift in the substance of Canada's policy towards Israel. So before we come to the conclusion that there's been a significant shift, I would wait. The words that were used in the statement are important because there was fairly strong criticism of Israel. And it's also noteworthy that it was done in coordination with France and the UK and without the US. So it's not irrelevant. But if you take a few steps back and you look at Canada's policy towards Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict under 9 and something years of Trudeau, this is broadly consistent. We are overall pro-Israel. We support Israel. We trade with Israel. We have diplomatic relations, close relations with Israel, but we occasionally criticize it. We support a 2-state solution, but in practice, we haven't done much to move in that direction. And we, importantly, oppose Hamas, which we list as a terrorist organization and do not support. So mostly, at least so far, I don't see that big picture changing.
We saw the UK, after putting out this joint statement, suspend trade talks with Israel, impose fresh sanctions on West Bank settlers. Mark Carney has said Canada will decide what it might do, but it's up to Israel to act. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I would say, speaking of the difference between rhetoric and words and concrete action, the UK suspended trade talks with Israel, but the UK did not suspend trade with Israel. It is just suspending talks that were apparently not progressing very much anyway. So that's not very substantial. In terms of sanctions against extremist settlers, this is something that a number of European countries have already done in the past. Canada has done it in the past under Trudeau. The Biden administration did it, but the Trump administration suspended these sanctions. So what is on the table now for Canada, but also for European states, is additional sanctions on extremist settlers in the West Bank, not just any settlers, but the more extremist ones. That is, at this point, one of the, if not the main tool that could actually be implemented.
You suggested this is kind of no big deal, and yet we played that clip from Benjamin Netanyahu, which was part of a much bigger statement with a very extreme reaction to this joint statement. If it's no big deal, why is it provoking such a strong reaction?
Well, I think one concern in Israel now is that there could be a broader movement of more countries, Canada, Europeans, Australia, perhaps others, coming to not only criticize Israel with words, but actually implementing actions. And at some point, if there is a snowball effect, it does start affecting Israel. So what Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing, which is the same recipe that he's used in the past, is to try to shut down criticism by going nuclear, basically saying as soon as there's criticism of Israel, and let's be clear, what was in the statement by Canada, France, and the UK was mild criticism, compared to what you see elsewhere. And it was very clear that there remains support for Israel, that Israel remains a friend and a partner, and that Hamas is a terrorist group. That was actually clearly said in that instance and elsewhere. So for Netanyahu to equate a fairly mild middle-of-the-road statement with support for Hamas, first of all, is extremely dishonest. It's full of factual inaccuracies, but it's a very transparent attempt to simply shut down criticism, which often works.
So it is true that in the very first paragraph of the statement, they do say, we call on Hamas, is the three leaders, we call on Hamas to release immediately the remaining hostages they have so cruelly held since October 7th, 2023. The statement itself says, as an example, the Israeli government's denial of essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population is unacceptable and risks breaching international humanitarian law. You view that as mild?
I view that as mild in the sense that it's only words. I mean, these are strong words. These are somewhat stronger words than we've seen in the past from these three countries. But my point is that as long as these remain statements, the actual impact on the ground in terms of the diplomatic relations between these three countries and Israel, and more importantly, the influence that it could actually have on Israel's decision-making is at best, very marginal.
Now, there were other events this week that played into this picture, as we acknowledged off the top. On Wednesday, the Israeli army fired shots near a diplomatic delegation, which included Canadians. Mark Carney called that unacceptable. Canada summoned the Israeli ambassador. To what extent do you think that is likely to affect this tense moment between the two countries?
I think it can affect it in the sense that it's part of a broader trend. And that broader trend is growing impatience in Europe, in Canada, with Israeli actions. If this had been a completely isolated incident with nothing else going around it, then I think it would have been very quickly forgotten. But it feeds into this growing impatience where in France, in the UK, in Canada, and in a number of other European countries, there's a growing willingness to take a firmer stance against Israel. And something like that really risks feeding into it, but on its own will not drive it.
The other incident, of course, the shooting death of these two staff of the Israeli embassy shot and killed in Washington. It was after that some Israeli officials and later Benjamin Netanyahu tied the shooting to the words of Canada and these other countries. You heard a moment ago Pete Hoekstra defend Israel, but had nothing to say about the suggestion that there is blood on Mark Carney's hands. What do you make of the U.S. response?
Well, first of all, I think it's very noteworthy that Ambassador Hoekstra did not explicitly agree with what that Israeli minister said. And I think that was pretty clear in the way that he did not directly answer your question. I think there's a few things to say about that. First of all, there is a significant increase in anti-Semitic hate incidents in Canada, in the US, in Europe, and beyond. And that is a major cause for concern. There is tremendous anxiety within the Jewish community in Canada and in other countries, and it's justified. And that attack earlier this week, which let's see until all the details come out. But to me, all indications are at this point that it qualifies as a terrorist attack. Just confirms that these significant levels of anxiety are justified. That being said, and this is a parallel debate, the accusation that Carney or Starmer or Macron in France have blood on their hands is excessively dishonest. And again, there's no doubt in my mind that it is not true. And it comes back to the point of blatant dishonest attempts to shut down debate, to shut down criticism, of saying that measured statements that are balanced, that criticize Israel but do not side with Hamas, have blood on their hands and encourage attacks like that, for me is really just an attempt to shut down debate.
Okay, Thomas Junot, we are out of time. Thank you for this discussion.
Thank you.
Thomas Junot is an associate professor of political science at the University of Ottawa. Lots more coming up on the House podcast. Mark Carney is about to experience life on the floor of the House of Commons, our journalist panel on what to expect. I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House, making politics make sense. Make sure to give us a follow so you never miss an episode, and tell us what you think of the show. You can email us at thehouse@cbc.ca.
Canada's capital prepares for a great royal day. the state opening of Parliament by Queen Elizabeth II.
Like that day almost 70 years ago, Ottawa is getting ready for a royal visit. King Charles III will arrive in Canada on Monday and stay for only about 24 hours. He's coming to deliver the speech from the throne, only the third time in Canada's history the monarch, and not the Governor-General, will do so. The first time was in 1957.
It is typical of the young Queen that her bearing is in perfect harmony with his Canadian setting. Hand in hand, she and her husband walk to the thrones of the crimson and gold Senate chamber.
That was, of course, her first visit as monarch.
Patricia Treble has covered royalty and the Canadian crown for more than 20 years.
Ironically, it was the Liberal Prime Minister, Louis Saint-Laurent, who had kind of put everything in motion. Of course, there was an election, and he lost. So it was John Diefenbaker, the Conservative, who would be the one welcoming her to Canada.
Canada's Prime Minister, Mr. John Diefenbaker, takes his position at the foot of the dais on Her Majesty's right.
For the first time, the representatives of the people of Canada and their sovereign are here assembled on the occasion of the opening of Parliament.
Queen Elizabeth came a second time to give the speech from the throne 2 decades later.
In preparation for the new trading environment which Canada will face in the 1980s, the government will introduce measures in this session to enhance Canada's exports.
1977 was the Silver Jubilee year. She'd been on the throne for 25 years. That was only the second throne speech any monarch had ever done. And they're rare for a purpose, I think.
On Monday, the king will go to a farmer's market and do the ceremonial puck drop at a street hockey game. He'll plant a tree, and Queen Camilla will be sworn into Canada's Privy Council, allowing her to formally give Charles advice in his role as the King of Canada. But it seems the real reason we'll see this rare royal opening of Parliament on Tuesday is because of Donald Trump's comments about making Canada the 51st state.
The king is here to emphasize Canada's sovereignty. Since we've had, let's face it, since we've had this existential threat that the Canadian crown, that fire extinguisher that's always on the wall, that always gets dusty and you only have to pull down in an emergency, it is now dusted off, it has been tested, and it is coming down off the wall, and we are going to see it on Monday and Tuesday in Ottawa.
If you want to make a point about Canadian sovereignty, what better symbol than the embodiment of that sovereignty?
Carleton University professor Philip Lagasse is an expert in the role of the crown in our parliamentary system.
I think the message is, look, we are a state whose institutions date back 1,000 years, that we inherited from the United Kingdom, yes, but that we have made our own to reflect our own circumstances and ambitions. And that sovereignty is not going away.
But why would Trump care if King Charles reads the speech from the throne?
So we know that the president admires the royal family. We know that he admires the king. We know that he was personally touched by the second invitation of a state visit to the United Kingdom, and that invitation was handed to him by Prime Minister Starmer, but written by King Charles himself. So the king carries quite a bit of significance for the president. And this is a useful reminder to President Trump that the king is not only king of the United Kingdom, but also the king of Canada. So if you respect and admire the king of the United Kingdom, perhaps you should also respect and admire the king of Canada, given that is the same person. So there is that signal being sent, which is not unimportant.
The king and I walked all of Canada, if you will, but we pointed out certain spots.
Perry Bellegarde is a former national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. He was in London earlier this week in his capacity as honorary president of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. At Canada House, he walked across a giant floor map of the country with King Charles.
Over there, and then we ended up in northern Alberta in Wood Buffalo National Park. And
you might be the only person who can say you've walked across almost all of Canada with the king.
But he was more particularly interested as well in Resolute Bay, where he dove under the ice.
Bellegarde thinks the king's visit is not just about sending a message to Americans and Trump, but also about reminding Canadians what makes our democracy unique.
Because we're a constitutional monarchy, people have to understand what that means and how we're different than our relatives from the South, the USA. And as a constitutional monarchy, we're far different from the system of governance they have down in the States. You know, we have the legislative, the executive, judicial branches that are completely independent, but yet there's a communication, collaboration link between the three. But they can't be dictated by one or the other, and as it could happen down in some instances down south. And people need to see that and realize that. That's why we're different as Canada.
And I would say, again, it's also a useful reminder to Canadians that we do not have the American presidential system, which has often been a source of attraction for many Canadians. Our media, much to my chagrin, insists on using language imported from the American system of government, terms, mandates, things like that. And this is a reminder that we are not that system. And that system is not faring so well these days. And our system is looking pretty good. And therefore, the symbol of that system, the monarchy, is worth noting.
The speech from the throne will anchor the King's visit to Canada, but Lagacé says what Charles says outside of that moment will also be worth watching.
When the King reads the speech from the throne, the King will be reading words written by the government of Canada. So it's understood that these are not the King's words. What we might look for is, what does the King say in remarks outside of the speech in Canada? And there it might be interesting to see what little hints and signals that he may send to try and demonstrate his affection for the country, the importance that he ascribes to its sovereignty and its importance in his mind.
Okay, I have two questions for both of you. You know that early next week, King Charles will deliver the speech.
But some aren't impressed by the royal visit. At the Quebec legislature, parties dedicated to Quebec sovereignty told CBC too many people don't feel an attachment to the king. Here, Pascal Bérubé and Catherine Gentilcourt of the Parti québécois and Québec Solidaire's Ruba Gazal.
It's a joke. King is archaic and colonial symbol. Quebec want to get rid of the monarchy, and Mark Carney want to keep it. And for me, if you're a Democrat, it's one more reason to make sure that we are a sovereign country as Quebec.
So to express Canada power, you have to go get a foreign king, what's that? How is the king convincing in any way? No. Yeah.
I think we agree that Donald Trump is not afraid of anyone. I don't think he's going to be afraid of Charles III. He's not frightening at all.
To have this visit of the king, this is not a mark of power of Canada.
What it is then?
Well, it's ridiculous. This is what I think about it, and I'm pretty sure that the majority of Quebecers think the same thing.
That idea of King Charles being a foreign king irks royal watcher Patricia Treble.
He's not a foreign king. He's not the British king at this moment. When he comes to Canada, he is the Canadian king. He's invited by his government in Ottawa. And, people are like, oh, he's the English king. I'm like, there has not been an English king since 1702 when William III died.
Quebecers, as forward-looking as they are, have also inherited these institutions. Their National Assembly is also an assembly in the British model. They have a lieutenant governor. It is as much part of Quebec history as it is part of Canadian history. So I would simply say that on the license plate in Quebec, je me souviens également de mes institutions. We should also remember our institutions, whether we like them or not, whether or not we want to change them. For now, this is what they are, and they are quite significant at this moment.
Perry Bellegarde points out that for Indigenous peoples, the relationship with the Crown is an especially important one.
For us, as Indigenous peoples, First Nations people, we have a treaty relationship with the Crown. I used to always say, we don't have a treaty with the Liberals, or the Conservatives, or the NDP, or the Greens. We have a treaty relationship with the Crown that was entered into nation to nation. And there was a strong connection and a strong sacred covenant, and that can never be broken.
And yet, for some people in this country, the institution of the monarchy is one that they don't have any relationship with. They see it as a relic of the past. We've heard the Parti québécois say things like that. Or it's just not something Canadians feel connected to. This is sort of a dusty piece of our history. What would you say to them?
You have to learn and listen from the past to chart a better path forward in the future, no question. And for us, The treaty relationship was a sacred covenant. And so we say that sanctity of agreement can never be broken. And that's why we have songs. We have ceremonies. Every treaty day, it's coming up treaty day now. And the prayers, it's treaty day, we call it, when we'll meet with representatives of the Crown to receive our annuity payments, our $5, which still has to be brought up. That's another issue, but we receive these annuity payments and discuss all aspects of this treaty. There's a song, the Treaty 4 flag song, or the Treaty Flag song. It speaks of the Queen giving us this flag to flutter in the wind forever. That's the relationship with the Crown we have. That Union Jack is very important. Yes, it flutters in the wind forever. And so you have to respect all those institutions of governance.
And it is Canada's institutions, however Canadians might feel about them, that will be on display during this visit to remind both the U.S. president and Canadians themselves of what makes this country unique.
What I also think we're going to see is everything is geared towards emphasizing he is the King of Canada. We're going to have a lot of Canadian flags. The RCMP is out. The Prime Minister, the Governor General, the Chief of the Defence Staff, the Commissioner of the RCMP are going to be with him on a lot of the events, especially on the second day when he opens Parliament. And I think that is deliberate and that is done to emphasize his role and to emphasize that we are different from the United States. We always look at ourselves as we are separate from the United States, but in this case, we are very, very different from the United States. And I think that's what the world is going to be seeing on Tuesday.
So, the King, the throne speech, plus Mark Carney will be taking his seat in the House of Commons for the very first time on Monday. There's a lot to follow in Canadian politics right now. To help guide us, Joël Denis Bellavance is Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse, and Stuart Thompson is the National Post Parliamentary Bureau Chief. JD, Stuart, welcome back to the House.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Inviting me.
Now, we have heard a lot about the King coming. How much do you think it's going to register with Canadians, JD?
I think it will, because he's coming here with a mission, I would say, a mission that Mark Carney is asking him to do, which is to defend Canada's sovereignty. Remember, he will be reading his speech from the throne. That speech from the throne will be written by Mark Carney and his people. So Mr. Carney will actually put words in the mouths of the King to utter for the world to hear, especially Washington. So I kind of like that kind of visit because it's very strategic. And I would add the following, that the King does not travel alone. Yes, he's got supporters and followers, but he's got a lot of press people, reporters who will be following him here. So whatever he says, whatever the words that Mark Carney wants him to say, will have an echo around the world.
Stuart, do you think it's going to leave an impression?
I think it will make an impression. And I think actually we just had some polling at the National Post that showed Canadians are pretty split on the monarchy. And the funniest part of it to me was that even Canadians who support the monarchy, about half of them don't think it does much. So I think Canadians are pretty apathetic. But I kind of agree with what Mark Carney has said about this, is that Canadians are very results-oriented right now. And I think they're willing to let him do things that might be good in this situation with Trump. So, your opinion on the monarchy is one thing, but I don't think that's actually the most important thing right now.
JD, you talked about the throne speech, and of course, there is such interest in the King, but that's the thing that could have longer knock-on consequences. It's about the government's priorities. What will you be listening for?
Well, how much Mr. Carney will put emphasis on defending the sovereignty of Canada. That's a big deal for me. And also his plan to make sure that he brings along the changes to the economy that he wants to bring. And he wants to go at a very fast pace. And that, I will be watching how he will execute all of that content of the speech from the throne. But also, sometimes speech from the throne includes vague languages that are hard to understand for people. So I'm looking whether they will have concrete languages for Canadians to understand his plan to bring about costs down, to bring about, more affordable homes, but also bring about, changes that will make Canada a superpower, superpower, as you mentioned.
Which we heard a lot about, Stuart, during the campaign. And the interesting thing here is the speed at which all of this is happening, that after the election campaign, that Parliament is being reopened. So should we expect something new in this speech from the throne, given that we just wrapped up the election campaign?
Yeah, I think that the speed is probably a sign that they know what they're doing. And I think that's probably a sign that it's going to be the things they've already told us they're doing. And the speed really is something, because it's been a crunch to actually get all the MPs sworn in, even. Like, we could have had, I think we'll probably make it, but it wasn't actually a sure thing that they would all be there. So I think that is, we only have about 3.5 weeks of the House. They have a couple of things they want to do. The tax cut is something they've told us. I think that's the stuff that's really going to matter in these weeks. And they're going to move quickly, but it'll be on things that we already expect.
JD, the Bloc and the Parti Québécois, which obviously both favor Quebec's sovereignty, have criticized Mark Carney for inviting the king. Do you think there is a possible negative impact from this visit in Quebec for Mark Carney?
I don't think so. I wouldn't be surprised that the king will say a few words in French. Usually, the speech from the throne is written in both languages, so we'll see. I think he does master the language quite well. His mother used to speak very good French, and so I'm sure that he will have something to say about the unity of Canada. But I don't see anything that would give munitions to the separatist parties to make hay out of it. So I think it's going to be a speech that will, be welcome in Quebec.
Stuart, in terms of what actually has to happen on the parliamentary side, one of the first things MPs need to do when they return is select the Speaker of the House. There are about 6 MPs in the running, we think. How much does it matter who gets that gig?
It certainly matters when you are 2 seats away from a majority and you don't want to lose any votes. So I think that will be probably the most interesting thing, is what party is the speaker from? And is there a conservative in there, someone like Chris d'Entremont, who attracts a lot of liberal support? Or do they have some partisan hang-ups with these Tories that they don't actually want to be speaker? I think that'll be really interesting on Monday.
Can you just spell out for us why it would be so significant if it was a conservative, for instance?
Well, it would take that vote out of the pool. So if you are a liberal and you become the speaker, that's one less vote that they have. And if hypothetically, if you're Mark Carney, I don't think you feel like you need a majority right now, but you wouldn't say no if you could get one. So if you could grab 2 floor crossers and get that majority, and you don't have a liberal speaker to worry about, it does actually matter. And I also think, too, that a Tory speaker might be a good thing, because we had some accusations of partisanship on the previous speaker. And whether that was true or not, this may take some of the steam out of that.
Yeah, and Chris d'Entremont used to be deputy speaker. He's pretty well liked, JD, from what I understand, across the aisle. But that question of trying to manage this new parliament, how big a challenge is that for whomever gets the role?
It will be a big challenge. We've seen the last parliament end on a very acrimonious note. The speaker then was Greg Fergus. He was a weak speaker, in my opinion. And
he is making a run for it.
I know he's running again, but I wish him good luck to win that this time around. But it's going to be critical, because if you want to restore order in the House of Commons, you need somebody who has the respect of his fellow MPs and all the parties. And Mr. Fergus was asked by 2 parties to resign twice, by the Conservative Party and the Bloc Québécois. It would be unusual for the speaker to come from the opposition benches, but we're not, in a very usual time right now. And Mr. Carney will be a new prime minister in the House of Commons sitting for the first time, so I think he will be looking for some kind of decorum. I don't think he would enjoy very much the kind of vitriol that came around in the last parliament.
Stuart, that does make me think, when JD talks about decorum and Mark Carney's nature, you guys, Christopher Nardi from the National Post, had this great piece about what life is like inside Mark Carney's PMO. Can you tell me a little bit about what we're learning about how his ship is running?
Yeah, well, it's on time, for one thing, which is new for us as journalists and new for a lot of people.
Welcome, yeah.
And I mean, this is the thing, is that he's definitely more demanding. And you can definitely see both sides of that coin when you talk to people about it, which is that, we're getting things done, we're starting on time, people have clear expectations. You can't come unprepared or you'll get roasted in front of everyone. And the other side of it, though, is that, if you say someone doesn't suffer fools, that's like the positive version of it, but maybe they're just a jerk, and that's the other side of it. So I think there are people who this kind of approach works really well with, and some people who are a little wary of it, and maybe that it'll wear thin over the months and years. I think some journalists got to see the Foreign Minister, Anita Anand, almost sprinting into the cabinet meeting, one of the first ones, because it was starting and she wasn't there yet. Yeah. And things actually do start on time, and he has some pretty strict rules. It's a big departure from the Trudeau years.
Anyone who has hung outside the cabinet room when Justin Trudeau was Prime Minister could probably list the people who might be sweating a little bit now. Melanie Joly. I do wonder, though, another thing that is different is this one mandate letter. That Mark Carney has put out, rather than mandate letters to the individual ministers. JD, what do you think the significance of that is?
It means that Mr. Carney has very clear priorities that he wants to set out in one letter so everybody understands and they are on the same page, because there is one page for everyone.
Literally.
To me, that just shows the kind of image that Mr. Carney has. He's a prime minister in a hurry, and he wants to give the beat to everybody. If you come to the cabinet meeting, you come in with your running shoes, not with your shoes, because you're going to be running a government and at a really fast pace. So I expect the ministers to be able to read that letter and understand clearly the mandate, even though they don't have a specific letter mandate for themselves. And I think it's a good way, because sometimes you spread yourself too much and you don't accomplish much with one-page letter. That reminds me of the formula of Jean Chrétien. If it's a note, I want it on one page so I can understand it. So this clearly is a page taken from the Chrétien era, if I may say.
It's fascinating because, I think people would generally hear like, oh, he runs a tight ship and like the sounds of that. But as your article points out, Stuart, there can be challenges that go along with that. If a prime minister is reading every document that isn't necessarily in his purview, or if he's pushing the gas at all times, how long can that last, I suppose?
Yeah, well, anyone who has covered the Harper years remembers this. And if you speak to people who worked for Stephen Harper, he read every page, and he would sometimes ask you a question about a page you didn't expect him to read. And Carney's the same way. And so Christopher Nardi spoke to some people who said, he's going too deep. He's reading stuff that's supposed to be for people 3 levels below him. That can work, and sometimes it can't work because you're doing too much. You're micromanaging. You can't actually get things done because you won't let people do their job. I don't think we know where it's going to go with the Carney government, so I guess we'll have to see.
I want to leave on this thought of Mark Carney in the House of Commons, Mark Carney in question period. We've never seen this before, and yet he is Prime Minister. It's an intriguing thing. What is one thing that you will be looking for? What is one thing that is top of mind for you both?
Well, I'll be watching the very first question that the opposition party will ask him and how he will behave faced with, maybe not cordial welcoming, more attacks, more virulent attacks from the opposition parties, and how he reacts to that. Mr. Carney has shown a tendency not to be very receptive to criticism. That's the name of the game in the House of Commons.
Stuart?
Well, another thing that Chris got in his piece is that people around him are a little concerned that he doesn't understand how hard it is to get things moving in the House of Commons, especially in a minority government. And it is hard. And I think we're going to see that committees, because it's a minority government, are really tricky. And he's been able to talk about moving fast and breaking things and all that stuff. The House of Commons may have something else to say about that.
It's just a fascinating time to be covering politics. Thank you both for your perspective.
Thank you, Catherine.
Stuart Thompson and Joël Denis Bellevance. Okay, that's it for us this week. Our crew on the House is Kristen Everson, Benjamin Lopez-Stephen, and Victoria Valido. And our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Technical production by Miguel Plante. Thanks also this week to Kathy Sine in Quebec City. I'm Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.